Hi everyone, my name is Steph and I'm the presenter and founder of the Butterfly Princess Show, where I do a variety of interviews with a range of fascinating people. And I'm delighted today to bring you a very special interview about Viking history. I'm joined by Lucas from the JORVIK Viking Centre. They're based in York, and the name Jorvik comes from the Viking name of York. That's how the York was known to the Vikings as Jorvik. And you'll be fascinated to know as we'll get to learn about the fascinating history of the Vikings in York. So, hello, Lucas, and thank you for joining me today.
Hello, Steph. It's a pleasure to be here today.
Obviously, you're from the JORVIK Viking Centre in York, so could you tell us what that JORVIK Viking Centre is?
Of course, I can. The JORVIK Viking Centre is a visitor attraction in York City Centre, and it's all about the Vikings and about Viking Age archaeology as well. The JORVIK Viking Centre is a flagship museum within York Archaeological Trust, which is a leading educational charity and a professional archaeological organisation, which aims to engage the public with heritage through community and education project events, as well as world-class visitor attractions like the JORVIK Viking Centre. So you might be wondering why we built a Viking museum in the middle of the city centre, and as you've already mentioned, there's the name of Jorvik derived from the Vikings. They were definitely here in York. Can you guess why we chose to build a museum on that spot?
We know that the Vikings raided parts of England throughout the early modern the early Middle Ages, and so possibly raided York a few times, and obviously they made a few discoveries of York in order to take gold back, because they did raids in the boats and things.
Yeah, definitely. So the Vikings were definitely very active in this part of the world, in the north of England. As you've mentioned, they were raiding the area as well. And we know this from a lot of written sources that survive from the time period. The English were writing chronicles going, save us from the Vikings! Things like that. But also, along with those written accounts of the raids, we have archaeological evidence as well. And that's the prime reason we've selected this area of York to build a museum, the JORVIK Viking Centre. And where it's actually been built is the site of a huge archaeological excavation which took place in the 1970s. The Archaeological Trust excavated that area over 5 years, excavating 1,000 square metres, and they found soggy, soaking wet mud underneath. So you might be thinking that sounds a bit bad. You don't want to find wet mud, surely. Because it's so wet, there's no oxygen underground. So with no oxygen, it means stuff doesn't rot away and degrade. So, I mean, what types of things would you expect to be found on an archaeological dig, do you think?
Oysters, because we know that, oysters is quite a fancy food stuff. You get them in posh restaurants, fine dining restaurants, but at the time of the Vikings is that oysters were a very popular food stuff with the Vikings.
Yeah, so on this site, we found hundreds and hundreds of thousands of oyster shells. And we typically find that sort of thing because objects like shells, they of course don't biodegrade. They're not made of the same sort of matter that, normal bits of meat or vegetables are made of. So loads and loads of oyster shells, along with the other types of things we typically find on digs. There was 250,000 pieces of pottery found on the site. About 5 tons of animal bone as well. So the bones of all sorts of animal species. So this can tell us about their diet and the pets they had. But those oxygen-free conditions preserved all sorts of other things, things that normally rot away. So can you guess what types of things we also found?
Maybe bits of clothing or cups,
Yeah,
knives and forks, cookery, things like that.
excellent. Yeah, there's all sorts of amazing and unique objects that were found on the dig. Objects like those made of similar materials too, which you just don't normally find. It's a very, very unique type of dig. So as you mentioned, things like knives, objects made of metal were found. So here I've got a replica of a lock that was found on the dig site. The original is in the museum gallery at Jorvik. I'm not allowed to touch the original one, of course. It would probably fall apart if I picked it up like this. But the absence of oxygen stopped these iron objects from rotting away. So we found things like this, we found lots of keys, we found nails, metal fittings for houses, along with all sorts of types of tools as well. Those preservation conditions also stopped things like leather from rotting away. So here I've got a replica of a shoe that was found on the site, and there were, I believe, about 200 shoes in various states of repair, made out of leather from calf skin mainly. And you mentioned clothes as well, so lots and lots of textile remains were found, things made of wool, linen and silk as well, silk being a very, very fancy material for the period. And here is a replica of one of our most famous objects that was found. Any guesses what this is?
Looks like a bit of a. I was gonna say when you first showed it me, it resembled a bit of a sock, but I don't think it will be a sock, although it does resemble it.
It is a sock, you're right.
Really?
Yeah, this is a sock. So this is an exact copy of one that was found on the Coppergate dig in York City Centre. The original one is on display at JORVIK Viking Centre, and it's the only example of a sock from this time period. So it's not necessarily what comes to mind when you think of the Vikings, is it?
No.
You're probably thinking of like swords and spears and arrows, and those things are found on other sites, but in York, we actually have this kind of other lens into the life of the Vikings, what their daily lives were like. And people were really, really interested in stuff like these socks and shoes and bits of houses that were found as well. There was a street of wooden Viking houses found on the site. So it was decided to build a whole museum there. And that museum's been open since the 1980s. You can see some of the best objects from the dig site on display. And along with those is our team of friendly Vikings. They won't hurt you when you go in there. They're not very well armed. And they will tell you all about the objects on display. And of course, we've also got our famous ride as well. And the ride is a recreation of what that street, Coppergate, looked like in the middle of the 10th century. You can see what the Viking Age looked like. You can hear what it was like as well, because they're talking in the Viking language as well, Old Norse. And you can also smell what the Viking Age was like, because we've recreated the aromas of the Viking Age.
And I can guess that the smells during that Viking Age wasn't very pleasant.
It's rather pungent, yes.
Has there been any religious artifacts found? Because we know that, religion for the Vikings was very important, praying to Freya and Odin, and they had these beliefs in human sacrifices. So has there been any discoveries of anything of that happening in York?
That's a really good question. The Viking Age is quite a long time period. It covers the very end of the 9th century through to the middle of the 11th century, so quite a long period of time. And throughout that time period, we actually see lots of cultural and religious change amongst the Vikings. So in the very early period in Scandinavia, that's where they have the really good evidence for stuff like worship of the pagan gods, evidence of potentially human sacrifice, animal sacrifice, very interesting types of grave goods, and the most common religious symbol being the hammer of Thor, which was often worn as a necklace. But the JORVIK Viking Centre, we of course are in England rather than the Scandinavian Viking homeland, so we're a little bit removed from the traditional Viking culture of the early Viking Age. And also we're a little bit later in the Viking period as well. We're kind of showing you the second half of the Viking Age. And by that point, they've changed religion, really. We don't have anything from our sites that reflects Thor, Odin, or Freya. We actually seem to have much more Christian types of objects. Because believe it or not, the second half of the Viking Age, loads and loads of Vikings actually converted to Christianity. And there are even Viking saints in the Catholic Church as well. So we have things that are more like little crucifixes that some of the Vikings would have worn. And we've got a replica of a beautiful stone cross as well, which is clearly a Christian monument, but it's covered in Viking-style artwork as well. So we have stuff that is a bit religious, but not the traditional religion of Thor and Odin.
We mentioned at the beginning that the Vikings were very interested in raiding the parts of northern England. Do we know why that was?
So there are lots of different theories on why the Vikings travelled from Scandinavia. It might have been that Scandinavia is a bit of a rocky, rugged part of the world, particularly in Norway. So to get good resources, they had to go further afield. Some were trading peacefully, others were raiding and stealing this sort of stuff. England at the time, particularly some of the wealthy monasteries in the north of England, famously Lindisfarne, which is the first place we know the Vikings struck, they were full of beautiful objects. People in this time period had a habit of putting lots of stuff like gold and silver in churches and monasteries, and they don't protect churches very well. Monks aren't the most kind of warrior-like people, are they? So for the Vikings, they'd be very, very easy targets, very easy sources of wealth.
I wanted to talk now, just to finish off, a bit about the parent company of the JORVIK Viking Centre. So you said you offer like educational programs. So could you tell us a bit about them and how people can get involved?
Certainly. So on the one hand, there's our educational offer for school children. They can make bookings to come and have educational workshops all about the Vikings or archaeology with our team of staff. We also have quite a few other ways as well to get involved in sharing the unique heritage and history of the Vikings and their archaeology here in York. So we have quite regular periods throughout the year when we will take on volunteers who can come into JORVIK Viking Centre and talk about the objects with people, and it's open to anyone really who has any enthusiasm for history and archaeology, who wants to offer a bright and friendly welcome to people. You don't need to have any background training or knowledge in archaeology or this time period. We've got an amazing volunteers team who can bring you up to speed on all the fascinating information from this time period. More information about volunteering opportunities as well as job opportunities as well, like joining our team of Vikings, are advertised on the JORVIK Viking Centre website, jorvikvikingcentre.co.uk, under Get Involved. But also, if you're more interested in the archaeology side of things, then there are various opportunities to participate in things like training excavations, as well as archaeological projects for volunteers to assisting as well. And these are advertised on the York Archaeology website, which is yorkarchaeology.co.uk, under the Take Part tab. But if you just want to support the work we do, even buying a ticket to JORVIK Viking Centre or visiting one of our events at the JORVIK Viking Festival, all that money raised helps support us in our work as an educational charity to build better lives through heritage and engage the public.
So if any of the viewers, audience members today have got like the Viking bug, where would you recommend they go for like extra reading, any online resources we can access?
That's a very good question. There's a lot of good material out there now about the Vikings because it's such a popular time period. It really depends on what aspects you're interested in. If you're interested in the mythology of the Vikings, there are some great translations of the sagas and the Eddas, in particular the poetic Edda and prose Edda. You can find good examples of those online, as well as in most bookshops as well. You'll learn all the stories about Thor and Odin from those. But besides that, I mean, go to the history section of your local bookshop. You'll see so many great resources there under the early medieval or Viking section. I'd be here too long if I listed every great book about the Vikings.
Yes, and I could recommend something else, because I'm a customer of Wonderham, which is the teaching company. It's an online app where you pay £17.99 a month, and they do a lot of lectures where you can listen to them or watch them, and they do a lot of courses on the pagan religion and the Vikings and Norse mythology. So that's another personal recommendation for me if people wanted to go and find out anything more.
That sounds like a great resource.
Thank you. And just finally, in your opinion, I don't know if you've seen the Viking series or the Viking Valhalla series, but if you have, I mean, please say if you haven't, but if you have seen it, do you think that that's quite adequate? Have we got the Viking period down to a T, or?
With a lot of modern depictions of the Vikings, there are some artistic liberties, I think, that are taken for entertainment purposes. So there are some good things about the TV show. They've got a lot of the characters from the source material, like the saga of Ragnar Lothbrok, for instance. Some real-life historical characters are in the mix as well. There are some things, I will say, that are a bit inaccurate, but I completely understand why they've added some extra fun things into there for the purpose of making an exciting TV show. And it gets people interested in the Vikings, which is, of course, great. And hopefully people will then maybe look into the stories and the real sources behind these TV shows. People can, of course, check out some of our own resources we've put online, where we can tell people about maybe the truth behind some of these legends. We have videos on YouTube and Vimeo. We've also got a podcast as well, where we look into characters like Ragnar Lothbrok and characters from the Vikings Valhalla show.
What's the name of that podcast? May I take a look at that?
So our podcast is That's JORVIK Viking Thing podcast, and it can be found on all major podcast platforms like Spotify, Apple Podcasts and Google Podcasts.
And thank you for your time today, Lucas, and to you as well, Gary, for recording this fascinating interview. And all I can say is thank you for your time, and I really do hope that this interview will encourage audience members to get down to the JORVIK Centre in York and to learn about the Viking period. And also I hope it's encouraged people to look into archaeology. So thank you both for your time.
You're welcome. It's been a pleasure speaking with you today.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.